Welcome to another episode of the Drum Corps Coffee Shop podcast. I am Rob, and here next to me is my good friend
George Collins. Nice to talk to everybody and be back.
Dude, it's great to have you back, George. So we are about 7 episodes in, and I am super excited for today's episode because it's a hero of my youth. But before we get into that, I just wanted to take the time to thank everybody for listening who's tuned in so far. And I wanted to ask too, if you can, feel free to leave some comments if you're watching on YouTube or a review if you're watching on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate all that. We might read some in a future episode. So without further ado, if marching percussion had a poet laureate for exercises and cadences, our guest today would probably be at the top of the list of that. Wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. You know, people talk a lot about, there's a word that gets thrown around a lot these days, influencer. You know, it's kind of a big thing on social media. But when you walk around the lot, especially in Southern California, I think you can pretty much identify really quick who one of the biggest influencers are of our activity, literally today. And that is our guest on the show, because his exercises continue to be played and used by so many groups around the activity now.
And what I got to add too is not only is this gentleman just a great writer in general, but he's a drum corps champ.
Yep.
As a performer, as an instructor, INE, and you know, definitely like I don't know, I can't think of any more to say. Can you, George?
Nope. I think we should go ahead and welcome Mr. Murray Gusseck to the Drum Corps Coffee Shop podcast. Welcome, Murray.
Welcome.
Thanks to both of you. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, and we are very honored to have you here. And I am especially, like, as always, a fanboy, because when you guys were coming up, that was kind of when I was coming up too. So I was able to see you performing a lot and listen to a lot of the stuff that we see on YouTube Live.
Nice. Yeah, I felt like I've gotten to know you guys just a little bit over the last couple of weeks since we talked about doing this. I've been listening to the shows, and it's great. I mean, I liked all of them that I've heard. In particular, I loved the Kevin Murray one just because I haven't heard that guy or talked to him in so long. So it's just like a serious blast from the past. And, you know, just what you guys are doing for the activity, I think is to be commended, and thanks for doing it.
Oh yeah. We definitely try to give back whatever we can, you know, to the activity. Gave us both so much. So
Right
let's kind of go back in time a little bit. Are you from Southern California originally?
Yeah, I'm originally from Redlands, if you guys know where that is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hey,
That's not too far from here.
We're not too far from there at all. I'm in Rancho Cucamonga, which is probably about 15 miles away.
Yeah. So I grew up there. You know, Redlands didn't have, and you know, this was back in the late 70s, early to mid 80s. I graduated from high school in 1988, and you know, there wasn't much in the way of like indoor marching percussion or anything like that. And where I went to high school, the percussion teacher there was a man named Greg Van Winkle, and he had marched Vanguard. He was a timpanist for Vanguard. In fact, he was the first grounded timpanist in the activity, if I'm not mistaken. So the first time you saw a percussion player just grounded up front was just the timpanist, and that was in 1981 Vanguard. So there were a bunch of us that came through high school there that ended up kind of going up north and going to Vanguard. But yeah, that's where I grew up.
So that was back then. There was only Redlands High School back then, correct? So was it the Terriers, the Redlands High School Terriers?
Yep, the Terriers. That's right.
That's cool. So did you go to high school with Andy Aranda also?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Andy's good people. He was one of my instructors when I was in RCC.
Andy was 1 year above me, and in fact, you know, my first year of marching Vanguard was 88, but it wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be 89 because I was graduating in 1988. But because Andy had gone up and made the line and was marching in 88, he had there was another member of the tenor line up there. In fact, it was Mike French, who was marching tenors in Vanguard in 1988. But there was some they were worried about he was having some back issues with the drums and everything. And I don't know the whole story there, but basically Ralph was wanting to have somebody else lined up. So Andy gave him my name, and that's how I ended up marching, kind of last minute in a season early in 1988. But yeah, Andy was basically the reason for that. So I owe him a debt of gratitude, and he's a good buddy. We still stay in touch.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Was going to Vanguard, like when you first heard about drum corps in general, when you were first exposed to it, I assume it was high school. I don't know if it was earlier than that or not, but was Vanguard always the place for you back then?
Totally. It really was. I may have been a little bit odd in that regard, but yeah, it was because our teacher, Greg, he had come from there. So he had so the drum corps tapes and stuff that we had access to were kind of Vanguard centric. And in particular, he had a tape of 81 in which the corps won. And it was sort of a 0 to hero year for the corps. Like they started out being sort of rough and kind of grew to win the whole thing at the end. And I was pretty new to marching percussion when I started high school. I was a bass drummer first, and I didn't know anything about drum corps until Greg kind of introduced me to it and the rest of us. And for some reason, 81, like the tape we had, I just listened to it so many times that I probably could have transcribed it. I just fell in love with it. And really what I was in love with was Ralph Hardiman's music and like his take on how to orchestrate percussion for music that previously didn't have any percussion, and there was a groove to it and just a really good feel to his writing. And so really for me, it was like, I want to go play Ralph's music. That was my main motivator for coming up to Santa Clara.
What was the first drum corps you got to see live and in person?
We went to RCC in 86, and I remember I was kind of half baked in terms of my where I ended up with my true solid intention to go march. I was sort of about halfway there. So I was kind of I remember really liking Vanguard that year. They had 6 bass drummers, which blew my mind because we came from a high school and it's all we knew was, we thought double stroke rolls were sick, that's where we were. Right. So I remember thinking Vanguard was cool with their 6 basses, but I remember watching the Blue Devils and I remember just going, oh, I didn't know you could do that. They just had I forget what section or what tune it was in their show, but they had these pianissimo, French rolls, the snares were just doing these really crispy, cool 3-stroke rolls. And yeah, I'll never forget that. But it was a year later in 87 when Santa Clara did the Russian Christmas music show and kind of a best of some of their best strong suits. And it was in 87 seeing them at RCC where it was 5 minutes. I mean, literally 5 minutes from watching them. I think they had won the show and they were doing a victory concert. And I was right up front on the track at RCC. And it was 5 minutes into that. And I'm I'll be doing that. I don't know how. I don't know what I have to do, but I will be going there and playing with this group.
That's so great.
Yeah, it just kicked my butt.
So 88 is your first year. You guys go through the season. You chase Blue Devils pretty much throughout the whole season. Finals night happens. They announce in third place, the Blue Devils. Or are you guys sitting there thinking, okay, did we win this? Because for the whole year, that was the one quarter pass, correct?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm generally not one for having a great memory with this kind of stuff, but I do remember just what you said. And I remember going, wait, so third place, well, wait a second. So there's 2 places left. I didn't know who else was in the running at that point. And I didn't have a very worldly sense of all the different corps out there. I mean, I knew who Madison Scouts were, but I I wasn't considering them at that time. I probably just had my head so stuck in my own little small world, as a 17-year-old, just trying not to die, I just remember tripping out and being like, who's left? And then when they announced, us in second, it was like, wait a minute, who's left? Oh, okay.
Yeah, the dark horse.
The dark horse.
Madison Scouts, yeah.
Good for them. I mean, they were great that year.
So, but one thing you guys did, you guys kind of broke a barrier and you guys won high percussion after the Vanguard not winning high percussion. What was the last year for that? 79? Was that the last year they won high percussion prior to 88? I want
to say, yeah. I mean, definitely like the Fred Sanford lines, I mean, like dominated the 70s. But then it sort of went more to the Bridgman.
The Bridgman, yeah.
And then obviously Blue Devils in the early 80s. So it might have been a little while before Santa Clara had won, or since they had won.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, I was pretty young at that time, and all I knew was the way I felt at the end. And we really had the best show of the year at that show. And it was one of those shows where it's like, you go out onto the field, you see the crowd, and then you're in the tunnel and you're like, what just happened? So it felt really good, like getting that trophy. It felt really pure and good. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I think I learned this on on one of your podcasts, but we got it on GE.
Right. There was like a tiebreaker.
Yeah.
There was I want to say a 3-way tie between Garfield, Vanguard, and was there somebody else? The Bridgman? No, it wasn't the Bridgman. But
no, it wasn't the Bridgman. Yeah, not Devs.
No,
I don't think it was them.
Well, there was a tie, and you guys ended up winning. But as a 17-year-old, that must have been an amazing feeling. First year in the course, 17 years old, and you guys win high percussion. Where do you go from there?
Yeah. Well, it's all kinds of different places, as it turns out.
I know, it's interesting, Murray, that you talk about that, because, after we do this for so long, if we manage to stay in the activity, there is nothing like those early years, when you go from it was a dream to actually, oh, now it's a reality. Now I have to do it. Like you went from wishing you could play Ralph's beats to actually playing them. But that feeling that you have, like when you first go through it, is it's something you never get again, and it's really special that you got to experience that. I think a lot of us have all gotten to experience that in some way or another through this activity.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like when you're where you want to be the most and where you've been pining to get into, and then you're playing the stuff that you heard other people play before you, and you're doing it next to some of your own heroes and all of that. It's the best. And I have distinct memories, not many of them, but I have distinct memories of just, being on the field or just looking up at the crowd and not being nervous somehow, because I felt like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. Everything's cool. Like, no matter what happens, everything's cool because I'm supposed to be playing this music and doing this thing right now. So,
yeah. Did you have any growing pains that year though, as a, fresh out of high school and, learning how to do the drum corps thing, especially at such a high level?
Yeah, for sure. Well, my body, cause I joined late. So what happened was, prior to the Memorial Day camp, Andy calls me up, and I'm still in high school and he's marching, and he says, hey, we got a guy who, they're a little bit worried about his back, and they want to see if they can get a ringer on deck for, in case, they have to replace this person, and you want to come up and try out. And I was like, yep. So I went up there. Luckily my mom allowed me to go, which I'm thankful for, because young kid, it's like, that's a stretch for some folks. But I went up there and tried out, and, I was in a position where I didn't know anything. So I had gotten some music, so I had gotten some of that down, but I didn't know anything about the program or, a lot of the exercises. And I just remember, so I'm basically being pushed to my limit because there's nothing to fall back on. I have no preparation to really fall back on other than just, this is how I play. And this is the way I can assimilate new information. So in a way it was actually comforting because there was nothing else to do but just give it my all. And at the end of that camp, Ralph said, okay, we'll call you if we need you. I was like, okay. And so life went on, and I had kind of written it off. And then the day before I graduated high school in June, whatever that was, I get the call from Ralph, and he goes, all right, Mike's out, you're in, get here as soon as you can. And it was like, so I graduated. And then the day after that, I got in the car and I drove up there. And I think I got there. I think I drove up on a Saturday, or maybe it was a Sunday or something. Yeah, I think it was a Sunday, and I'd gotten there in time for them to do an exhibition performance at one of the local high schools. And so I watched that, and then I started rehearsal with them. They were at 9 to 9s, obviously by that point. I started rehearsal with them the next day, and I marched my first run through on Tuesday night. And
wow, that's incredible.
It was. Now, granted, drill was arguably a little bit less complex for us. It wasn't dots, it was dressing forms back then for us. It was, however, I think if I'm right, like, it was the first year Myron Rosander, the drill writer, decided to go to get just really gnarly with some of the drill. And we had a lot of we have fast tempos. We had a really fast 3/4 section in the second production where we were just booking, and we were going back, front, left, right. It was like his first maybe real push away from the old style of writing where it was more drumline center and that kind of stuff. So it was aggressive, but luckily that, I had the other guys in the section were great with me. It was like a new puppy to them. And so they kind of took care of me, and they just basically like hooked a leash around my neck and drug me around the field for 2 days. And, so that's kind of how I learned the drill.
That's awesome. So 88 happens. You guys go into the 89 season, having won high drums in 88. Was that expectation still there to push? Was it 89 a senior line? Did you guys have a lot of carryover from 88, or what was that like?
Well, 89 for me was problematic, partly because we were doing the same show over again. Wasn't real happy about that, but what was I going to say? I'm 18 and just a second year. But we had, it was an interesting year. It was full of good and equally bad things. Like, we had some really good players in the core that, there was a buzz on the street. I remember in 89, it was like Santa Clara is going to do really well this year. I couldn't tell you why in particular that buzz was there, whether it was from the fact that we were repeating the show or something else, but it just seemed like there was a buzz. And so some horn players came out of the woodwork that hadn't marched recently. So we had a better core overall, I would say. Although I and this is just my opinion here, so anybody that's from that year, don't send me too much hate mail, but the drum line, not so sure. Like, I remember us just having a lot of problems. And I think in particular for me, I had just come from this year where I was kind of little golden boy. Like, I had come up really late, slid in really fast to the show, done a good job, held my own through, some injuries and some other issues. So in 89, I feel like I was maybe a little bit cocky, and I was a little bit more of a, leadership role within the section, I suppose. And I just didn't behave well. Like, I look back at, if you guys know Mike Apodaca,
yeah,
you can ask Mike, and I'm sure he'll fill you in, because I was not a very nice boy to Mike, who was, even younger than I was when I first joined. But so I think the coloring of that year for me was largely due to that. and even though we won full core and we won percussion, I personally didn't feel great about it. And I remember as they were literally, my memory is they're putting the medals around my neck, and I'm thinking, I'll never have a year like that again. Like, I do not want another year like that. I don't care what happens, but I will be better, and we're gonna be a better section from here on out. So
it's really interesting to hear that, because from the audience's perspective, they don't get to see any of that, but it happens, and it can happen to the best of cores. It can happen to the worst of cores, and it can happen for a variety of different reasons. I mean, it's an experience. It's a bunch of kids trying to, learn how to be adults together, away from other adults, on the road, and in a situation that's intense, right? Because the competition's intense, the physical work is intense. So it's not a surprise to hear that. I mean, yeah, of course that happens, and getting to the end of the year and saying, "Yep, not going to do that again. Don't want to have to do that again."
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. There have been years where we've won high percussion, where it felt like the year before to me was like really pure, because that win felt really good. I mean, I didn't really know as much from my vantage point how we stacked up against the other cores from like just a strict drumming perspective, but it felt good to get a reward at the end of a really tough year when we'd had our best performance. Whereas in '89, I almost feel like sometimes we got, some gifts here and there, and winning without feeling good about it is a terrible feeling. Like, I would rather lose and feel great than win and feel, kind of yucky about it.
Well, let me ask you, Murray, is winning, or maybe even back then, or like even like moving forward, is winning important to you and on that level, or is there more to it? Are there other things to get from what you guys are doing? Because I think that sort of speaks towards what you're remembered for, known for. I don't want to say remembered like you're gone, but like, what people know you for is so much more than that. I mean, it's like the winning is almost secondary to why, because secondary to the impact that you've had.
Yeah. That's a great question. I would say that, the short answer is no, winning is really not that big of a deal. That's not to say that when, you're out there getting your ass kicked, that you're happy about it or think everything's great. I mean, especially being on the staff side, there's more pressure because it's up to you to make a difference there and try to better your group's position. But I think as a member, I don't remember being real focused on that. That's not to really, I'm not really trying to speak on behalf of everybody in the drumline or anything like that, but, Vanguard, as you guys are, I'm sure, aware, Vanguard had a certain, I don't know, religion's maybe a strong word, but they had a certain thing wrapped up in it, right? Where you're
really strong identity.
An identity thing, and just talk about tradition and integrity and all of this kind of stuff. And the cores have met or fell below or exceeded those expectations at different times over the years and stuff. But that was definitely being that was the message from the top. And in a lot of ways, the top was Gail Royer. But in other ways, the top was, it was Ralph, it was Glenn Crosby for us, it was Myron Rosander in a big way. And, so if you were focused on winning, you didn't really want to talk about it too much, because you might, you might get scolded by other members, or you might get your motivation challenged or something like that. It's just kind of silly in a way, but yeah. And I think into the teaching years, I would say it wasn't super important back then, at least to me either. And, I feel reasonably confident I can speak for, some of the other guys, at least on the percussion staff, like Jim and these guys. And at one point, Dean Westman leading the horns in the late 90s, where we just wanted to make something great. and we wanted to make some music. And if we get rewarded for it, that's great. If we don't, as long as we feel like we're getting great performances and making music, I think we would basically feel okay about it.
That's cool. I have a question actually about the equipment. Like 89 was different, like quad wise, because the configuration you guys had, they were like toms with scoops. Who picked that? Who picked those drums? I'm just kind of curious. I've always been curious about that. I jokingly call them the toms with the scoops.
Oh God, they were awful. Yeah, they were. It was flat bottomed, shallow shelled, toms, 10, 10, 12, 13 with plastic scoops. And I think it was something that they were trying as a way of, making it lighter weight, and experimenting with different projecting and stuff like that. And they were lighter. I mean, the year before, in 88, we had been using the previous season or two's drums, which I think were Premier, and the tenors were sixes. So we had the 2 6-inch Spock drums, and they were pretty heavy. So it was nice weight wise, but yeah, I didn't like those drums at all.
And then you guys made up for that in 1990 with the copper drums, correct?
With the full cutaway depth shells with real copper around each drum, real sheets of metal that wrapped around, and if you pulled off the rubber weather stripping around the bottom edge, you could see the seam where the copper pieces came together, and oftentimes they weren't able to cut a smooth seam, so it'd be this jagged point of metal that you would, if you weren't careful, rake your arm open. And those drums, like, I think that's probably my favorite sounding set of drums, even though they were heavy as, what. One time Ralph made the snare drummers carry the drums back to the, like we were at a camp and we had just gotten the drums, and, we had been all day out on them and we were just dying, and we were walking back to the food truck for dinner and had probably a football field or more to go. And Ralph was like, "Hey, snares." And they were already halfway there. "Come back and carry these guys' quads for them." We were like, yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's Ralph. Awesome. Yeah.
But yeah, we were using pinstripes, and this was before crimp lock. So we were using glue pinstripes. And curiously, Pearl had chosen to, I think they were cutting some costs or something, because the metal, the lugs and the tension rods, at least the lugs themselves and the bolts that fasten them on, were made out of a substandard metal. And we would be reefing these things as high as they could go, and these lugs would just snap. And it happened over and over and over again. I mean, I have vivid memories of warming up in front of crowds, and all of a sudden you just hear this crack, and you just see a piece of metal just shoot off, like literally it's a projectile, and like one time it almost hit somebody in the audience watching us. So we'd have to, go, we had just a bucket of replacements by this point. We just get on there and, get them on real quick and retune up, and we'd be good to go. But it was always a little bit cheeky with that, because you never know whose lug was going to bust next.
Yeah, they had to, I remember they had to upgrade the technology. There's a funny story from my rookie year, which was 90, when I was marching VK. Our snare tech and caption head, Dave DeLulo, used to tune, and we were using the flam heads. He would tune the snares, and to show like courage, he would tune it with like his eye, like right over the lug, just in case they would snap. But those things, I mean, they literally had to go through some upgrading in the engineering to reinforce them, because that was a real issue back then.
Yeah, and I remember that was really the only year we dealt with that. I think it was fixed by the next year, but it was a curious problem to have for briefly. And I also remember that was the first year we were using Gamble cookies, or the year before we had these weird kind of sad little thin light mallets that were about the diameter of a 5A. And they had kind of smallish nylon disc beads. And then they had a giant fat rubber grip around the end. And that's what you squeeze down on. So it was like, it's like, a giant diameter stick that weighed like a pencil. It was very, very strange. So we had the Gamble cookies the next year, and we were in hog heaven at that point, because those things were just great.
Now that was 90, correct?
Yeah.
Now, to me, it's always seemed like between 89 and 90, there was like, and somebody even mentioned it on the Facebook page, on our Facebook page the other day, that there was like a renaissance in quad drumming overall. And I want to say, like, for me, it seems you can hear a difference in 90 compared to 89. Is that safe to say, or am I just hearing things?
Night and day. Yeah. Yeah. I would say, in a way, it started with my finals night in 89, just going, that's not going to be repeated. I'm going to be better. I'll be more patient. I'll spend more time. We're going to make this thing great, and just thinking in my own little world of the tenor section. And that decision, along with just some good luck of the people that we had come out, we had Tyrus Allen and Lavelle Jones come out from the Midwest. We had Matt Altmeyer come up, who was VK alum, and and then of course Mark Campbell, who, he's such a great guy, and such a great story of achievement, because he didn't try out on tenors. He was trying out on snare, because, he had originally followed his brothers, who were legendary Blue Devil snare drummers. He had gone out to Blue Devils to try out. He was, I think, the third of three, but his luck wasn't so good, and he didn't make it. And so he just was not going to come home empty-handed. So he came down to the South Bay, and he tried out for snare for Vanguard. I think it was the camp before Christmas or something like that. And he didn't make it. And Glenn, before the Christmas break, and this was back when a lot of people, we lived in the area and we rehearsed, on a weekly basis and stuff. And so over Christmas break, we had 3 weeks or something like that until we were going to have our next rehearsal. And Glenn said, if you can come back after Christmas break and hold your own, we'll talk about it. And man, this is a guy who went from, he was asked, if memory serves, he was asked to play like a bunch of different stuff, and he was asked to play singles down the drums. Okay. Well, it's 3 to a drum, right? Couldn't do it. Couldn't figure it out. Just had no intuition for tenor drumming. And he went from that to he would just not let himself get cut. It was a cool thing. And I think for me, it was a great chance to put my money where my mouth was in terms of my commitment to just be a better, like, section leader type of figure, because I needed a lot of patience with Mark, because it took him a while to get stuff, but once he had it, like, it was there. And so we had a really great group of guys. We got along great. We were a really odd motley crew, mix of folks from all different backgrounds and everything. But it was, it was the best thing ever, as it turned out. And we would make a point to take the book, and we had Scott Johnson teaching Vanguard for the first time. He had come in as a snare tech. And so with Scott there, we had Ralph's music, yay. And we had Scott's grace notes, yay. Like, we had the best of both worlds. And like, so Scott paved the way for harder stuff to be included in the book. And, he took a lot of ownership over it, and, rehearsed the heck out of the group so that we could play the stuff. And so, we just had like the best of both worlds writing wise. And we took it upon ourselves to try to even add more stuff to it. So after, an all day rehearsal, we'd stay behind at the field that we rehearsed at, which didn't have any lights. So I'd take my truck and turn the lights on and shine the lights on the field. And we'd like rehearse some little drill move and just like work out some crazy meaningless part that just was cool to us. Like, there was a spot in the show, this was Carmen, the year we did Carmen. And I don't know if I could sing the part, but it was like it's a 6/8 style part. And we had a sort of it was like, but it was in like a triplet meter, something like that. And rather than just keep it on one drum or whatever, how it was written, we worked out this part. So our left hands just swirled around these drums like nonstop while the right hand was like doing this other sort of independent pattern, playing the cheeses and the flams and stuff. And, you know, like, I don't think that part stayed. I think it got cut eventually, just because of the part in the show got cut. But that was the kind of stuff we were doing all the time to just one up it. And like the next morning, Ralph would show up and we'd be like, "Hey, Ralph, can we show you something? What do you think about this?" And we'd show it to him. He's like, "Yep, put it in." So we were kind of like, you know, yeah, just taking it to the limit as much as we can. So it's like, it was a good way to get ownership and of the stuff. And yeah, I think we were getting a great quality of sound that year, and the tuning, you know, like there's a spot on the finals tape where in the drum solo, we have a 4-count tenor break. And, you know, we played these 4 counts of the tap fives. People have different names for them. I call them the totally odalies. They just sort of went like this, right? And we had like 4 bars of a lick that had those. And luckily we were right in the center of the microphones, which you had to be to get clean recording back then. And it's just sparkling clean. I mean, like you can drive a truck between the notes and it's like, yes, it's 4 beats, but you know, it's awesome.
Yeah. That's, when I say like a change in quad drumming, like that's the part I always think of in the drum feature, just all the quad licks. I mean, there's some hurt the part in there too that was a
yeah.
The drums.
Uh-huh.
Forgive my singing because it's atrocious, but yeah.
And I remember, I mean, like I said, I was a rookie that year, so I turned 17 on tour and just completely wide-eyed at doing this thing, and you know, all of first tour, seeing you guys and seeing Blue Devils every night had just this massive impact on me. You talked about your quality of sound, and I really remember that line, the 90 Vanguard line, just sounding really powerful in terms of my memory. That was also, I want to say, the first year you guys played Martian Mambo, correct?
Yeah, that and Electric Wheelchair, although we didn't call it that. Those two things were basically birthed that year in early season.
Yeah, and in fact, I'd put up a video on the Facebook page of the 90 version of Electric Wheelchair, and you know, we had some talk on there, and come to find out the second part of that was called Funk It, and like the son of Funk It or something like that. I don't know, does that make sense?
Funk It was Scott Johnson's. Yeah, at some point, yeah, Electric Wheelchair, and I get the order of these things confused. I don't remember whether we started with Martian Mambo or Electric Wheelchair. I want to say we started with Electric Wheelchair. But at some point, Scott wrote a cadence, and we learned that, and it was called Funk It. And so we tacked that on and made just a big smorgasbord, bunch of licks.
Yeah, and Kevin Erickson actually showed up, posted up the music to Funk It, you know, and I guess it's rarely been seen out there in the wild. So it was kind of cool to hear the story behind all that.
Yeah. I think I have seen somebody's post of that, and it was like, because I only can remember like little tiny chunks of it, and so seeing that music was like, oh yeah, brought a lot back. But that was some fun times for sure.
Martian Mambo, I had the same conversation. I brought this up to Kevin when we talked to him about the ditty, but you know, a lot of times back then, it's, you know, there was this feeling that you know, when you played stuff, it was about bravado, and it was about really showing off like what you could do. But Martian Mambo seemed, I mean, it was, you know, a difficult piece, but that didn't seem like the point of it. And it was, you know, for back then, really revolutionary. This massive opening of your eyes to like what else is possible for a lot of people from the outside. My question to you is, can you speak at all to, you know, what inspired that exercise, where it came from, and maybe what was going on in terms of like your musical inspirations around that time?
Totally. Yeah. That came from one of Mitchell Peters' etudes from the Advanced Snare Drum Studies book. And I always misremember the number of the etude. I think it's like 21 or 22. But that's where that hook came from. And my high school teacher was big on the Mitchell Peters etudes, and we worked through his intermediate and then later his advanced book. And we would just have these sessions where he and I would sight read just because my reading chops were getting decent by that time. And, we would just sort of see who could go the longest on sight reading a particular etude. And that one, I just kind of fell in love with. The etude, it does a bunch of different stuff than Martian Mambo does. I basically just borrowed the hook, the basic rhythm. But I just remember thinking one day, this would just make a cool piece for the entire battery. Like, it just dawned on me, like, it was kind of like one of those things I hadn't written before. But I was like, who could do something like that? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to like make something and I'll take it to Ralph. And coincidentally, I think he had, if I'm not mistaken, like he had basically, let me back up just a second. Like Ralph is first and foremost about like empowering his students, and he's not selfish at all with the stuff that he does. And it's like, if somebody has a particular skill or an ability, he's like, yeah, let's use it. Let's do something with it. And I think he had put a challenge to the group at this point, to like, we had a weekend off or something. It was like, hey, everybody bring back a little something after the weekend and maybe we'll play it. It could be just a groove, or it could be a piece, or it could be just something not even on battery instruments, like, let's just do something cool as a group where you're the ones creating. And that's what I showed up with. And so it took me not very long to write. Once I sat down, it just kind of like, I just sort of puked it out for lack of a better word. And I showed up to Ralph the next time, and he was getting ready to go into a meeting. And I said, probably really sheepish, hey Ralph, hey man, I got this thing. Just didn't know if you want to take a look at it. Maybe we could, play it or something. And he looks at it, and I'm, this is all handwritten, and my handwriting is awful, and just really weird looking chicken scratch. And he's like, sing it. So I'm like, you teach it. It was his result. So like, he went into this meeting, and I made some copies, and went out and basically handed it to everybody and just gave them the lowdown. And it's an odd meter, and it's a very it's what some people would think of as an advanced odd meter, but it's not if you just feel it in 3, which was what I told those guys to do. It's just like it's in 3, and the second beat is short. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And yeah, so that was all I really needed to do. And we like played it later, and everybody seemed to be digging it. So that's kind of how that one started.
Now, when you handed that out to the line, did they just give you like a puzzled look, like, what is this? Or how did that go down?
Good question. If I remember right, well, Jim was marching bass. So I probably spoke directly to him and Walter Powell, or not Walter. He was first year that year. So yeah, I can't remember. We had our center snare, Carl. I can't remember who actually ended up being center at this time, because I think it shifted around once or twice during the season due to some injuries and some other stuff. But like, I just talked to a few people and just said, here's how it goes, and kind of like went down to the trouble spots and just basically reinforced the fact that it's in 3. Just think of it in 3, and the rest is just a little bit of math. And so I don't remember it being like a big, like huge deal. I think it came together actually really fast. But yeah, it would be really interesting to be able to go back in time and watch that, because my memory could completely be off, like it could. But I have this distinct feeling that it came together relatively quickly over the course of this one session that we had, and we kind of hacked our way through it for Ralph and the rest of the staff later, and they were just like, yes, that's cool, let's do that.
Well, I mean, kudos to Ralph for allowing that, allowing the a space for that to happen, because we all know how that turned out as far as how impactful that exercise was.
Oh yeah, iconic for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Ralph will just always be, that guy to me. He was just like so much my mentor and somebody I looked up to because of his writing. And the fact that he gave me that space, and we know the other guys on staff were supportive as well. And it's like the fact that he did that is just something that really changed my whole life. And it, in a way, like, I think everything that I've written, in that genre, it's just a little note to Ralph.
That's cool. Now, did Martian Mambo come before Electric Wheelchair, or did what came first?
That's a good question. I think Electric Wheelchair came first because if I remember right, like the year before, we had, the cores back in these days, we were still doing a parade or two here and there. And we didn't have a cadence to speak of. We just, our cadence in 89 was like a 16th note, 2-height check pattern with some diddles. It was just really basic. I don't even remember what it was called. But at some point in 90, I was like, we could do better than that. Like, no. Let's do something cool. So that was another one of those things where I just sat down and I started with some licks that I had kind of swirling around in my noggin and that I played for I&E, like just tenor licks, and kind of wrote stuff around that in a lot of areas. And it just kind of came together really fast. And I honestly, like, there was no, grand design. It just was like, I wanted something better than, Monkey Beat or whatever we were playing the year before to walk the core down the road. I mean, I guess somebody could argue that with some of the polyrhythms, it's not the best choice for walking somebody down the road, but like, whatever. It's in 4. So
Dude, my favorite part of Electric Wheelchair is always to see what's going to be played during the quad feature, because, you have like a little bit of everything. One time I want to say I just heard quarter notes, or just, I mean, that
was probably me. Yeah, I actually wasn't the best soloist for that spot. Like, I would sometimes get too nervous, or I'd try to be all that. So at a certain point, I remember going the opposite direction and just being like, burp, 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 just 4 quarter notes. But some of the other guys were like way cooler and more inventive with their licks.